And we're live, I guess.
Yeah, we are, I guess.
Okay, welcome to Photoshop Adventures. This is episode 2. I am Matt, and with me is the wonderful G Greenslade. How are you
Hello! Oh, I'm good. Sorry, I got in like way quick then, didn't I? I was too enthusiastic. Okay, carry on. Sorry.
There's nothing wrong with being enthusiastic. Okay, so being our second episode is a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Thanks for everyone who tuned in last week and spoke to us in the chat channel. It's great to hear you guys giving us your questions and feedback in the chat channel. So if you're watching today and you're not in the chat channel, you should register an account and be in the chat channel.
Yeah. Yes.
Also last week, we had some requests for Save the Pixels t-shirts.
Yes! I'm so excited about these. Like, so excited. I want one.
So excited to announce that it is now a thing. You can now have your very own Save the Pixels t-shirts. They come in black and or white. And you can get them at cafepress.com/PhotoshopAdventures.
Yay, yay, yay! Yeah, I'll be buying one. Yeah. I feel weird buying one off like us, but that's cool. We'll do that. Yeah! Anyway.
Yeah. Okay, so what do we have lined up for the show today?
So, today we're going to start off talking about all of, the main kind of file types that we use in, with Matt and I anyway, in kind of photographic and game work. Then we're going to go on to talk about some of our life-saving tips. We have some pretty simple ones today that will be easily implemented into your workflow, and you'll be like in love with them as much as we are. And some of you will probably already know them anyway. But and then after that we have, I think, one of the most important parts of Photoshop. Maybe that's just me because I do a little bit of compositing. What about you, Matt? I don't know.
It's fairly important for pretty much everything.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. So it's channels and alpha channels, and we're going to talk a little bit about that and doing selections. We'll sort of go back to selections and talking about how they interact with channels. And then after that, we have our ban hammer. Yeah, we're banning something again this week.
We'll save that for a surprise at the end of the show. Stick
Yeah.
around to find out what we're ban hammering today.
Yeah. My favourite part of the show. I get to tell everybody what I hate. Anyway, and then after that, we're just going to have like a bit of a freestyle session, as we did last week, where I'm just going to work on something, and you guys can ask questions or whatever, and see how some of this stuff kind of works in the real world. And I'm starting from scratch today, so it won't be like last time where I was just looking at edges and you couldn't see it on the stream.
So hopefully we'll be covering a few of the things that we talk about today in the freeform section as well. So you'll be able to see all those wonderful things in action.
Yay! Cool.
So I guess let's jump into our first section. Photoshop for Mad Noobs.
Photoshop for Mad Noobs. Yeah. Maybe we should say what noobs means. Does everyone know what noobs means? It's newbies. Sweet. Done. Okay. Next part.
Okay.
Right. Do we want the...
Yes. Can we have the slides up, please?
Can we have the slides? Okay. We're doing this uber technically. Yeah. Cool. Compression.
Okay. So first thing to know about with file formats is about compression. And there are two main types of compression that you'll have with your files. There's lossy and lossless.
Yeah.
And so lossy means you trade quality to have a smaller file size for something like displaying on the internet where it takes time to download files.
Yeah.
You want a small file size.
Yeah.
So the other type is lossless, where quality is important, and perhaps you're like giving files to someone on a USB key, or you don't mind waiting 2 hours for a file to download. Something like that, you're better off with a lossless format.
And that will save everything. And we talked a bit about this last week anyway. That's why we decided to talk about this time, where you saw the difference between kind of that lossless and lossy thing on the JPEG on PhotoshopAdventures.com. You can have a look at that now. Just the difference between a JPEG being saved over again and again while you're working on it. It was our ban hammer thing. So yeah, that's pretty much the difference between lossy and lossless. Except there's some other stuff too, but we'll talk about that as we go on.
So with compression, there's always a trade-off. You don't just get a small file size for nothing.
Yeah.
So with lossy compression, the trade-off is quality.
Yeah.
So you'll lose definition in all your pixels. You might get like bad color, all that kind of thing. It might go all pixely, but you'll get a small file size. So the idea is to strike a balance between like what kind of quality is acceptable visually, and how long it takes to download.
Yep.
For lossless, it's slightly different. I don't know, many people
Go nuts.
with the advances in technology these days, with faster computers and that, it's not so much of an issue, but the trade-off with the lossless compression is the time it takes to actually compress and decompress
Yep.
the file. So
And you get more, you'll get more color, you'll get more, like in Photoshop you get more color to play with, all that sort of stuff. So,
well, yeah,
and the layers and all kinds of stuff will happen. So, yeah.
when you reopen the file, it'll be exactly the same as
Yes.
when you saved it,
Yes.
which is what that's for.
Yeah. Saving the pixels. Lossless
Save
saves the pixels. Anyway, oh god. Buy the t-shirts. Anyway.
Yeah.
Alright, next one. Next thing.
Next one. Let's do the next one. So our next one
Is my
is
favorite. Sort of.
PSD. Okay,
Yay.
so PSD is Photoshop's native format. It means that anything that you could possibly do in Photoshop will get saved in a PSD. There's a few limitations on it. It is a
Yes.
lossless format, so saving large files can get quite CPU intensive.
Yeah.
Um,
I think I did a thing like a video a while back where you can see it's like 2 hours compressed into like 2 minutes, and one of my saves were taking ages with a PSD. It took like forever. So yeah, or that might have been a PSB, but we'll see that in a minute too. So but
So-
they don't always take ages, depending on your file size and how many layers
yeah.
you've got. Yeah.
So some of the other limitations with the PSD are it has a 30,000 pixel size limit
Yep.
in each direction, horizontally and vertically. So theoretically, you could get
Massive. It's pretty big.
a massive. What is that? Like 300,000 pixels in a single.
Something like that. Yeah. It was. Yeah.
Surely it should. It's more than that. I don't know.
And
Yeah, I've worked that out. Right. 300 million, I think.
Yeah.
Maybe.
we haven't worked that part out yet. We're good at maths. Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're
30
good at maths.
megapixels.
Yeah.
That sounds about right. 30 megapixels in a PSD.
Maybe. Yeah.
So yeah, that's one limit. Another limit is that it has a limit of 2 gigabytes per file. So
Yes.
once you start stacking up your layers, especially in like high resolution sized images, you'll blow this limit out fairly quickly.
Yes. I do it
And
every day.
that is where our next format comes in.
dun, dun, dun. Oh, and the thing with PSDs is that I'll just throw in. So you can save layers. You can also save vectors and things like that within your PSDs. So yeah, PSB is our next favorite, I think.
PSB, I think uses these a lot more
I
than
use
me.
them all the time, with all the layers and all of the saving of the pixels, and everything like that. You end up with like huge file sizes, and so anything over 2 gig, as soon as you go over 2 gig or over that 30,000, so if you go 30,001 pixels, you'll end up having to save it as a PSB, and Photoshop will come up with an error. It'll sort of save, and then it'll say, please save this as a PSB, and you know you've done something kind of fun and awesome. And it's basic. Everything's pretty much the same as your PSDs, except for you have a 300,000 pixel size limit as opposed to the 30K, and
that's in both directions.
both
again.
directions, yeah. And that's a massive file size too. That's like, I opened one before and it was a 250 gig file size. Ridiculous, stupid. That was just
And
one
that's on
layer.
one layer.
Yeah. And my computer was like, scratch this to the full G. I'm like, okay. I couldn't even do a brush stroke. It was awesome. So yeah, that's a PSB. Once you go, you'll usually work in PSDs, but once you go bigger, you'll end up being a PSB person like me. So, our next one. JPEGs.
Next file.
We talked a lot about
Okay,
this.
JPEG is probably the format that most people are kind of most familiar with, and that's because it is the main file format of the internet age.
Yeah.
So JPEGs are a lossy format, so they trade file size for quick downloads.
Yeah.
And it's optimized for internet connections to get it in your browser displaying as quickly as possible. And the way it sort of works is that it works better when there's a lot of color variation. So with a photo where you've got like differences in tone between the shadows and highlights on a person's face or something like that, it works better with color variation than
Yeah.
flat colors.
Yep.
Because if you've got a lot of flat colors, it's very easy to see the tiny variations of where it's compressed,
I think the
and you'll
most
get
common one is
artifacts.
like when you photograph the sky, for example, and it's a nice, beautiful blue day, and you photograph the sky, and then you'll compress something in JPEG, and you'll end up with like almost steps. That gradient in the sky will go from you'll notice lines. So
Yeah,
that's called
banding.
artifacting,
That's called.
banding
Yeah.
and artifacting, and sorry, yeah, it was banding, wasn't it? Banding, it's evil. So yeah, there we go. And you can
So
only save this as one layer as well. So unlike your PSDs and your PSBs, where you can save as many layers on top of each other, a JPEG is one singular layer. So it's a flattened. Yeah, that's it. Once you have a JPEG, you can't deconstruct again, if that makes any sense. But we did talk
yeah.
about that
So
last week.
generally, yeah, we talked about it a bit last week. So the end verdict is JPEG is always going to be your last step.
Yeah.
So if you're working on your photo and you're all finished and you've got it saved as a PSD or a PSB and you want to upload it to Facebook,
Mhm.
JPEG, last thing you do, upload it to Facebook, never touch the JPEG again.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool.
Okay, so
Raw is our next one.
now we're moving on to RAW format,
Yeah.
which is
Well,
awesome.
it's awesome. Yeah. I think I am of the belief that every photographer in general should be shooting in RAW. If you're not right now, I'd reconsider your formats. People say, oh, like it takes up so much space, blah, 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 but like seriously, what is a bit of space in comparison to a really amazing photograph? That's me. That's what I think anyway. And yeah, so RAW varies from manufacturer to manufacturer because it depends on the camera that you own and the brand of that. And so I don't think there's many real standards in terms of things. It is both lossy and lossless, and that once again depends on your manufacturers, but not so much. It's like the least amount of compression that a camera can possibly put on your images, and it tries to photograph as many colors at once. And actually, Matt, you did a really good explanation of this to me before, that you're probably better at explaining this than I am, but yeah.
Okay, so I guess I could try.
Yeah, yeah.
What it does is it'll save out for each pixel. It'll say about what color that pixel is
Yeah.
in sort of a normal sort of RGB style. So it'll say this pixel is this color, this pixel is that color. But then it'll also save, in addition to that, like a much more detailed
The kind of version, I guess.
version of that, but
Yeah.
just a black and white, like intensity. So you've got the one version of the image, which is just the color, and it saves out a second, more detailed version of just the brightness of all of the pixels.
Yeah.
And you don't actually see that, but that's what's happening behind the scenes. So you've got all of your colors, and then you've got so much more detail in the brightness of all your pixels. And in photography, that's pretty much like the most important thing, is
Yeah.
like preserving all your highlights and your shadows and your detail and in your shadows and all that kind of thing. So that's why RAW is really kind of the best one to use for photography.
And generally you can't save over it either. I believe, well, yeah, I haven't seen anybody save over it, but it's just like it just sits there, and then you use programs such as Lightroom, and what else? There's Aperture, there's even Bridge, I think you can, from RAW. Photoshop will do it as well, Photoshop Camera Raw.
Adobe Camera Raw, yeah.
Yeah, they'll save out RAW files for you, and you use that to kind of, I guess, choose your representation of those pixels, is what they do. So RAW's kind of our baby. We like RAW a lot. It's where you begin. It begins in RAW, it goes to PSDs and PSBs, and then it ends in TIFFs or JPEGs. That's how I feel anyway. I think that's
That's pretty much it.
Yeah, yeah. So the next one is TIFF. And TIFFs are lossy or lossless once again. So you can choose your compression on your TIFF files, and that will come up in your Photoshop dialog as you're kind of working. Actually, I'll save something as a TIFF just so you can have a look. Where are we? TIFF. There we go. And here we go. It comes up with what type of image compression we want to use. There we go. There's LZW, which I think is the most common. Zip is like a newer version of compression, and that even has JPEG compression within TIFFs. And yeah, there's all kinds of, it asks if I want to save my layers down here as well, what my layer compression and all that is. So it's kind of a really flexible